love, loss, and acceptance. This art piece takes us on a fantastical adventure, exploring some of the most base human emotions. Initially, I was going to sit and react to this movie, but once I was 2 minutes in and this scene was playing, I knew that it wouldn't be right to try and make jokes and entertain during this movie. So I turned the camera off and I watched The Boy and the Heron. Even though it's already been out for a year, but that's because it just came out on Netflix and I'm a cheapskate, so I wouldn't go watch it in the movies, though I really wish I did because it's that good. The Boy and the Heron is set in 1940s Japan. We start out with meeting our main character Mahito, played by Luca Padovan, as a fire starts in the local hospital which his mother is currently in, which really sets the tone for the movie, and was the instigating factor to me turning off the camera and just experiencing the movie instead of reacting to it. The way this scene is animated is genuinely kind of horrifying, as the line art of the characters looks like it's melting away at the heat of the flames. As Mahito runs towards them, you can see his line art just getting pushed to one side. It's, a lot. It really puts this fear of fire into the viewer, as we're seeing these flames from Mahito's perspective. And what's so great about this intro is how fast-paced it is, which juxtaposes the rest of the movie. As normally with Studio Ghibli movies, we expect a slower paced, almost mystery. As viewers, we are dragged along through a fantasy story where characters are metaphors for things that we can experience in our own lives, or other characters are physical representations of concepts that we have, like death and anger or sorrow. Jumping into the future, Mahito and his father Shochi, played by Christian Bale, move to their countryside estate, where we meet Mahito's auntie, Natsuko, played by Gemma Chan. We learn a lot about these characters and their lives in this very short scene. We learn that Mahito's father owns a factory, so is a rather wealthy man, and Mahito's auntie is pregnant. Though I can't remember if it's Mahito's father that got Natsuko pregnant, or whether it was a previous husband. Either way, this pause that we have with Mahito feeling the kicks of the child symbolizes to us as a reader that this baby is going to be a big part of what is to come in this story, or more so the pregnancy itself. And so as we're being shown around the estate, we come to meet the 7 grannies, which to me felt like a reference to the 7 dwarves from the Grimm brothers fairy tale Snow White. But I also think there could be an argument to suggest that there are similarities to things like Alice in Wonderland, or even The Wizard of Oz. Though, again, that might just be because in my head I connected these grannies to the 7 dwarves, and from there I had the mindset that there was inspiration taken from those fantasy stories. When we first meet these grannies, I was honestly quite afraid of them, as they scurry around like gremlins or rats. And so as the tour comes to the end, Mahito is shown his room, where we get this 2-minute long sequence of Mahito just sitting, falling asleep, and Natsuko bringing him tea. And it's at this moment where I want to talk about the pacing, or more specifically, the quiet moments. In this movie, between moments of action or anticipation, there are these scenes that are just slow, sometimes silent moments, which I feel are there to give us as viewers this moment to think, as not everything in this movie is straightforward. It doesn't directly tell you what everything is or what everything means up until the very end. So as we're exploring this somewhat mystery, these quiet moments are used to just feel. And this moment is interrupted by Mahito's nightmare, revisiting the moments in the flame, where we see Mahito's mother for the first time as she burns away saying his name, which is quite harrowing to watch. But as he wakes back up, he goes outside and we see the heron. Though, yes, we saw the heron previously in the movie, it's this moment where we see the heron and we get the piano ding dong as the heron's song plays. with these mysterious and slightly whimsical notes on a piano. And the rest of the song is honestly quite dark and dim, with long, drawn-out, deep chords, as we start its song with high notes almost inviting, and then warning with these low, long chords. And as Mahito follows, we are introduced to the tower, which is what the movie is based around. Almost everything that happens in this movie is related to or inside of this tower. And even though the story is centered around this tower, we are still half an hour away before we even take our first steps inside, which just really shows how slow-paced this movie is. And so as Mahito returns home and the day goes on, Mahito sees his father Shochi and Natsuko kiss. Which, at first, before it's fully explained who Natsuko is to Mahito, I was all kinds of confused. As when we first meet Natsuko, she mentions that she is going to be Mahito's new mother. But another moment in the movie, she mentions our father. Though, with further context, you realize that she is referring to her and her sisters, not her and Natsuko's father. So put into context of Natsuko being Mahito's auntie, it's not as strange. Though still, his wife died, and now he's with the sister? I don't know if Shochi's got game, or... But family matters to one side. In the morning, we learn that Mahito is going to go to school, which lasts all of approximately 2 minutes in this movie, as he gets in a fight with a kid, and then bashes his own head with a rock, which even now I don't quite understand, though I think it's him trying to rebel against the idea of going to school. I think he's trying to give himself a worse injury so he can avoid going and learning. Though, again, bashing your own head in with a rock is not how I personally would go about that. And so as Mahito is laying in bed resting, now with a wound in the side of his head, we get our first instance of this enemy relationship that Mahito has with the heron, as the heron shows up in the window saying the same lines which he hears in his nightmares from his mother. Which made me wonder whether the nightmares were influenced by the heron, or whether the heron could just peer in on his own fears. And so the next morning, with Mahito sick of this heron shit, he decides to go out with a stick and beat the fuck out of the bird. But the bird, not being a normal heron, breaks the stick, and we have our first conversation between the two, with the heron explaining that since Mahito has arrived, he is to be his guide and take him to his mother. Which is interesting to think about these moments after watching the movie, where we learn much later down the line that all grey herons are considered to lie or consistently lie whenever they talk to you. So the heron here saying that he is a guide for Mahito to see his mother is in some parts a lie, but is also directly the truth, which I find quite amazing with how many layers of thought had to go into the script writing, especially with the sentences that the heron says, as he is meant to lie consistently, but also be a guide and help Mahito somewhat. So trying to find a balance between just lying and not helping, but also having this arc where the two bond and become friends is really quite mind-blowing with how well the script writers actually did this. And as the day goes by and we have some small interactions between some characters, we come to the next day, where we find out that Natsuko is having morning sickness and is feeling quite unwell. So Mahito is asked to go and see her, and we have this very gentle, delicate moment between the two characters, with Natsuko apologizing to Mahito for what happened to his head, not knowing that Mahito was the one who did it to himself. And after this sweet moment, Mahito leaves the room, where again he is met with the heron requesting his presence. So Mahito does the only smart thing and crafts a bow and arrow, because what else are you gonna do to take down a annoying fucking bird? And a small funny detail to me is that the crafting of this bow and arrow is almost equal in screen time as Mahito's school life. But also, since this is a wonderfully crafted story, we have a story beat planted inside this montage of creating a bow and an arrow, of Natsuko going into the forest, which leads into a search party being sent out to find her. So Mahito joins the search, and together with Kiriko, one of the grannies, played by Florence Pugh, they adventure deep into the forest, where we finally take our first steps into the tower. And the two are guided along by the heron, which I have forgotten to mention, but I will mention now, is played by Robert Pattinson. Which I'm also just going to take this moment to mention how incredible the voice acting and voice cast is. It has genuinely been quite a surprise for me to see all of these names with these voices. There was only, I think, about 2 or 3 voices that I recognized, even though the rest of the voices come from such a star-studded cast. And even now, knowing the voices, I still can't picture those actors with those voices. And while in the tower, the heron takes us to Mahito's mother. Or so we think. It turns out to be an illusion that the heron has made, which is our first indicator that this pelican is just bullshitting his way through almost every conversation. And so angered by the fact that the heron has just lied to him about his own mother being alive, Mahito shoots him. With, as the heron describes, his number 7 flight feather arrow, which guides the shot on point and stabs the heron straight through the beak, leaving a hole that comes into play later in the story. And after that, we meet a shadowy figure that happens to be the master of the tower, who commands the heron to actually be a guide and to stop fucking around, to show Mahito his own mother. And so our duo, now a trio, sink into the ground, where we go to a different world. The first moment that we get in the other world is of Mahito landing on a beach, which kind of reminds me of the beach from Inception, which itself is a world within someone's mind. We get these establishing shots of boats on the horizon going by, and we learn that Mahito is on a small grassy island, where we see these golden gates, which I thought were meant to represent the pearly gates or heaven, but I believe that it's probably something different, but I'm not quite sure what it means. Another interesting thing about this moment is that there is no dialogue spoken for the first 2.5 minutes of being in the other world. And the first words spoken in this world are the words that are written on this golden gate. All those who seek my knowledge will die. Which again leads back to my previous point of those quiet moments. This movie has so many of them, but they play together so well. And this moment of silence is broken by the pelicans attacking Mahito and smashing through the golden gates into this graveyard. Which now, thinking on it, makes a lot of sense. As we learn later in the movie, the pelicans can no longer fish for food, so they eat the spirits of this world. Those that are yet to be born, and presumably breaking into this graveyard for those that have already passed. And coming to the rescue on a small sailboat is Kiriko of the other world, but also is our Kiriko. This is also the first instance the movie uses fire as a positive, as we see Kiriko spark up her stick to shoo away the birds. So the fire is used as a positive to our protagonist instead of a negative or something to fuel nightmares. And so after Kiriko saves the day, Mahito joins her on her boat and they set sail, where we have this montage of them catching a fish, but also learning the rules and laws of the other world. We learn that the people manning those other ships are buyers and are unable to kill anything in this world, so they rely on Kiriko to feed them. And we also learn that it is the same for the warawara, which when I say warawara sounds dumb, but it sounds really cool in the movie, and they are the cutest things Or well, second cutest things that I think Studio Ghibli has ever made, since, you know, the wandering soot exists. But as they're carving up the fish they catched earlier, Mahito passes out and wakes up in Kiriko's house, under her table, surrounded by these dolls that look like the other grannies. It is mentioned that we're not supposed to knock these dolls over, but throughout the rest of the movie, it's never mentioned why. But this was my first indicator that this character that we're seeing is actually Kiriko, as there is only 6 dolls, and of course, as we know, there are 7 grannies. And because this movie is smartly written, this is also where Mahito figures out that this is Kiriko, which he mentions later when saying her name without ever being told it. And so as they sit down ready to have dinner, Mahito leaves to use the bathroom, where we have this 5-minute long sequence where we learn about the Warawara as they float away ready to be born, which reminds me a lot of the Disney movie Soul, where we see all those unborn spirits going down to Earth ready when it's their time. Though in this movie, they get eaten like little baby turtles by the pelicans, and I'm on the side of the baby turtle Warawaras because fuck those pelicans. And as the pelicans are eating the Warawara, we meet Lady Hime, who has the power to create and control fire, which again is another instance of fire now being used in a positive light, though this time a much larger scale, which leads to Mahito freaking out and screaming at Lady Hime to stop, because yes, while she's burning the pelicans and shooing them away, she's also burning and killing some of the Warawara. And so after those events, the remaining Warawara float away into our world to be born. And we go back to a slower moment of Mahito going to sleep. But instead of falling asleep, Mahito goes outside after hearing a noise, where we meet a pelican that has been injured through the fire. Where we hear the other side of this food cycle. The pelicans aren't doing it out of spite or out of being villainous, they do it to live. It's the only food source they have here in this world. And as this burned, injured pelican asks and yearns for death, Mahito stands and doesn't give him the relief until the very final moment where the pelican falls. And to break formula, this pretty intense, thought-provoking moment isn't given a quiet moment afterwards, giving us chance to think or feel, as the heron comes in and interrupts what Mahito is doing. But Mahito, having just had all of these experiences in one evening, has accepted to just ignore the heron for now. This moment with the pelican is more important to him than whatever the heron has to say. So he goes back inside, gets a shovel and buries the pelican. He's learnt both sides of the argument and feels sorry for all sides involved, giving each one the respect it deserves. Which again plays on this idea of fire, as it has given life to some of the Warawara, but in turn has taken life from the pelicans in a very visceral, intimate way for Mahito. And so as morning comes around, we have this moment over tea with Mahito, Kiriko, and the heron, where we learn about the heron's nature to lie. But it is posed as a question to the heron by Kiriko, saying that she was told by a grey heron that all herons lie. But if that were true, then wouldn't that statement also be a lie, meaning that they don't always lie? Which is a similar thought-provoking question as the two guards where one tells the truth and one always lies, which I personally just find really interesting. And so after tea, the boy and the heron are sent by Kiriko to go on an adventure together to hunt for Mahito. And so as they say their goodbyes, we cut back to our world where there is a search party out for both Mahito and Natsuko. Also in our world, where we get a description of what the tower actually is and the backstory behind the strange occurrences, where one of the old ladies tells the story to Shoichi, explaining that the tower is actually a rock that fell from space and has a strange magical power about it. The old ladies also explain that Natsuko's granduncle discovered the rock and became completely obsessed, where he was the one that actually built the tower around it. We learn that her granduncle went missing in the long halls of this tower, but also that Mahito's mother went missing for about a year or so before returning back to this world after getting trapped in the other world. And back in the other world, the heron explains to Mahito that he's not able to fly because of the hole that he put in his beak. saying that it can only be fixed by the person that put the hole there. So Mahito creates a little cork out of a stick, and after giving it to the heron, he instantly tries to betray Mahito, which fails because the cork isn't quite right yet, and they have to recarve it, teaching the heron that he kinda needs Mahito too for this journey. And after they learn to somewhat trust each other, they find a house in the countryside that is owned by the blacksmith. However, they notice some parakeets that work for the master of the tower, or so we're told-ish. We also learn that these parakeets eat people. So the heron comes up with a plan that he will distract the parakeets long enough for Mahito to sneak inside, which will give him access to the tower where Natsuko is being held. And after successfully drawing away a lot of the parakeets, Mahito sneaks inside, but the second he does... oh, yep. It's unfortunate. And just as he's about to be turned into stew, fire erupts from the table as Lady Hime comes to save him. We also learn during this interaction that Lady Hime and Natsuko are sisters, which instantly made me think that Lady Hime is Mahito's mother. Which, again, similar to earlier, I feel like this is also the moment where Mahito figures it out for himself as well. And so as Mahito gets pulled through the fire, we end up in Lady Hime's house, where we learn that the tower can exist in all worlds at different times, kind of like the TARDIS. The two also share a very nice jam sandwich, as they feed themselves ready to sneak into the tower, avoiding the parakeet at all costs. And once they sneak inside, we see this long, elaborate hallway filled with all of these doors, which we learn are all portals to different spaces and different times and different worlds even. And as Lady Hime finds Mahito's door, parakeets close in, so they're both forced to dive through that door back into our world, but not letting go of the handle, because if you do, the door disappears forever. And in a split-second choice between Mahito returning to his father or going back inside to go save Natsuko, he dives back in with Lady Hime, ready for the adventure ahead. Though, of course, leaving his father very confused as he just saw his own child appear for half a second with some random person he's never seen before, and then disappear, maybe turning into a parakeet? And so now back in the other world, we get this overview of parakeet society, which looks relatively peaceful other than the fact that they eat people, as Mahito and Hime travel deeper into the stone, or into the tower. And so as they travel down, sparks begin to fly off of them as the stone is rejecting their presence here, as they come to Natsuko's delivery room. And now, I'm gonna be honest, this whole scene in the delivery room I don't quite understand, as Natsuko, once woken up by Mahito, rejects that he's there, and these pieces of paper start attacking them both and like pulling them apart. I'm not quite sure I understand it, but it feels like something that makes sense to me. Which makes no sense as a sentence, but either way, while I don't understand exactly the meanings behind what I'm seeing, I feel as though I understand through interpretation. I guess a super easy way to say it is that I didn't quite get what was going on, but it didn't leave me feeling confused. And so as Mahito is rejected by the delivery room, him and Hime fall unconscious and are taken by the parakeets. And so after that scene, Mahito wakes up in this dark room with a trapezium tunnel glowing in front of him. And whilst walking through, we have this quiet, long moment, giving us that expected time to fully absorb what just happened in the delivery room. And at the end of this tunnel, we come to this large room where we meet the master of the tower. The master of the tower reveals himself to be an ancestor of Mahito, the great-granduncle that got lost originally after making the tower. The great-granduncle is voiced by Mark Hamill. And since I forgot to mention it, Lady Hime is voiced by Karen Fukuhara. We learn that the tower's stability is held together by these 13 odd shapes made out of gravestones. And we learn later in the movie that these 13 stones have to be stacked on top of each other every 3 days to make sure the tower just doesn't collapse. The granduncle / master of the tower shows Mahito the stone that has given him all of his power and explains that he requires a successor, but it has to be someone that he's related to, aka Mahito himself. And in fact, that is the very reason he sent the heron to go find Mahito, so that he could be asked to become the next successor and continue trying to grow and stabilize this world. And then transitioning through a match cut of Sparks, it is revealed that Mahito has actually been captured by the parakeets and is being prepared to be eaten. And that's when the heron shows up in the shittiest disguise ever, but it works for some reason, and is able to free Mahito. And so as they're sneaking around trying to find Hime or try save Hime, we cut to a parade where we meet the Parakeet King, voiced by Dave Bautista, where it is revealed that the Parakeet King intends to use Hime as a kind of leverage against the master of the tower in order to gain more power for himself and his people. And so as the Parakeet King takes Hime up the tower, Mahito and the heron chase after him, though the Parakeet King destroys the stairs they're climbing by just cutting them to pieces, making them both fall to the bottom. And so as the Parakeet King pushes his way through the trapezium tunnel, demanding an audience with the master, Hime is released, and the Grand Uncle asks the Parakeet King for just a little bit more time as he's still trying to convince Mahito to become his successor. Cutting back to Mahito and the heron at the bottom of this very long staircase, another trapezium tunnel opens up where they are able to come through into this other heaven-like area. And so as Mahito and the heron enter, the Parakeet King leaves, but not really. He actually tails behind the gang as they go to meet the master. This is of course where the master explains what the stones are, which I did previously, explaining that Mahito would need to stack them once every 3 days. But overhearing this, the Parakeet King, not believing that his entire empire is held up by 13 lousy stones, stacks them himself, quite poorly might I add, and as they're about to fall, he slices them in half, which is the worst decision because now the tower is crumbling. As the Stone of Power bursts out, the Grand Uncle tells Hime and Mahito to go back to the Corridor of Time and leave through their own doors, as there's no way Mahito can become his successor anymore since the tower is collapsing. And so we get these beautifully animated couple of minutes of them running back to the Corridor of Time as the tower collapses. We see the Budgie Society running around trying to save themselves, and all of the characters that we've met so far meet up at the corridor at their own doors ready to say goodbye. And I was wrong earlier. Mahito realizes now that Lady Hime is his mother, that she has to go through her own door in her own time, where this, I feel, is the moment that Mahito accepts his mother's death. He understands that this entire journey has been about him coming to accept that moment. This whole adventure in this other world has just been grief, denial, anger, acceptance, all the stages. This moment is acceptance. As he looks over, smiling at his mother, he goes through his own door. And other than the final moments of the movie, that's it. The story that has been told is one of sorrow, but of acceptance and loss, and I think it's even of giving us those small moments, those quiet moments where we can think, where we can feel, and where we can grow. But other than me saying more philosophical words, that's the end of the movie, and the end of the video. So, thank you very much. And if you have watched this video but not watched this movie, I mean, crazy, really. But seriously, go watch this movie. I felt like a different person after watching this. For hours afterwards, I was in this state of shock and bliss and just acceptance of how life is. So from me, thank you very much for watching.